For over 30 years, I believed my father was a liar, a man who abandoned my mother and didn't share a drop of blood with me. That's what my aunt always said. She even showed me a DNA test to prove it. So I shut him out. But everything changed the day I stumbled across an old envelope tucked deep inside my mother's Bible. What I found inside shattered my world and exposed a betrayal so cruel it ripped through 3 generations. Turns out, the truth wasn't hidden, it was forged. If you've ever been lied to by someone you trusted most, you'll understand the pain of uncovering a truth buried in plain sight. Hit that like button if this story resonates, and share your thoughts in the comments, because silence is how betrayal survives. I grew up in a tidy little town in Ohio where secrets traveled slower than gossip but hit twice as hard. My name's Hannah Cole, and for most of my life, I believed my family tree had a missing branch, my father. When I was 8, my mom passed away from a sudden stroke. That left me in the care of my Aunt Susan, Mom's older sister, who stepped in like a savior. She moved into our house within days, took over the bills, packed up Mom's things, and locked away any trace of my dad. As I grew older, I asked questions. Where was he? Why didn't he come to the funeral? Why didn't he ever call? Aunt Susan always had an answer, sharp, rehearsed, delivered with that same cold finality. Peter wasn't your real father, Hannah. Your mom made a mistake. He walked out when he found out the truth. That line stuck with me for years. She'd follow it up by waving a folded document in my face, a DNA test, yellowed at the edges, showing that Peter Cole was not a biological match. Even when I was a teenager and started challenging things, Susan would cut me off. You don't need that man. He left you. I stayed. And she was right in a way. She did stay. She drove me to school, put food on the table, helped with college applications. She was practical, efficient, never cruel, but never warm. Still, there were cracks. Tiny ones. When I graduated from high school, I remember seeing a man standing way back behind the crowd. He was holding a small bouquet and clapping slowly. He never approached, never made eye contact, but something about him felt familiar. Later, when I described him to Susan, she rolled her eyes. That was probably just some creeper. Your real father would have sent a check if he cared. Eventually, I stopped asking about him altogether. I went on with life, got a degree in library science, found a quiet job at the state archives, and rented a modest apartment not far from the house I grew up in. Susan still lived there, alone now, guarding the family records like a dragon hoarding gold. She kept photo albums locked in drawers, birth certificates in a metal file cabinet, and old letters stacked in airtight boxes. Anytime I wanted to look through them, she'd claim they were being sorted or sensitive. It wasn't until I turned 36 that everything began to unravel. That year, our family planned a small reunion, just a barbecue in the backyard with a few surviving relatives, some of whom I hadn't seen in decades. It felt odd, even forced. Susan was never the sentimental type, but she insisted. We should honor the family line, she said, now that you're the only one left to carry it. I remember blinking at her. What about Dad? She flinched, just for a second. Peter was never family. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the man from my graduation, about how his hands trembled as he clapped, about how my mother used to hum when she looked at my baby photos, but never once mentioned another man. Something felt wrong, not vague wrong, intentionally buried. The next morning, I visited my mom's old church, the one she used to drag me to in a sundress and braid my hair for. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just needed to be in a space where she had once felt real. I asked the church secretary if they still kept old donation records. She was kind, maybe in her 70s, and led me to a dusty filing room. I never found donation slips. But tucked inside an old hymnal, my mom's, with her name inked on the front flap, I found an envelope. A plain, yellowing envelope. sealed, but soft with age. Inside was a copy of a DNA test. Same lab, same date range, but completely different results. Peter Cole, 99.9% probability of paternity. I just stared at it, frozen, numb. Because this wasn't just some duplicate, it was a correction, a truth I had been denied, a truth that someone, Aunt Susan, had deliberately overwritten. And suddenly, every memory twisted in my head. Every moment I doubted Peter. Every time I believed I wasn't his. Every time Susan said, "He left you." No, she erased him. I sat there for almost an hour in the church library, the old DNA envelope shaking in my hands. My mother's handwriting was on the front. I recognized the curve of her H's, the soft slant she always gave to the letter C in my name. It was unmistakable. She had written, "Keep this safe, in case Hannah ever needs it." I read that line over and over again until the words blurred. What had she known? What had she suspected? The copy Susan had shown me all those years ago, it wasn't this one. That one had been grainy, almost faded, with red ink across the top saying, "Inconclusive." I remember it clearly because it had settled into my bones like truth, a rotten kind of truth. But this one had a clear, sealed lab stamp, a signature from a geneticist, and a conclusive line that read, "Peter Cole is the biological father with a probability of 99.9%. I took a picture of the document with my phone, hands still trembling, and walked out into the bright summer sun like I had just stepped out of a grave. I couldn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I drove to a diner I used to visit with my mom as a kid. I ordered a black coffee I barely touched and just stared at the image on my screen. My dad was my dad, all along. And Aunt Susan, she had forged a test, lied to me, lied to everyone. But why? The first answer was cruelly simple. Money. My grandfather, Susan and my mom's father, had passed 5 years earlier. A stubborn man with a cold heart, but he'd left behind a tidy inheritance. I'd never asked too many questions when Susan said I wasn't entitled to any of it. "You weren't close to him, and you're not blood," she'd said with a shrug. But now, I realized that wasn't just a cold rejection. It was a calculated exclusion. She had made sure I wasn't seen as part of the family, because Peter wasn't considered family. And if Peter wasn't my dad, then legally, I was just the daughter of a dead woman with no claim to anything. It all clicked like falling dominoes, but something deeper itched at my skin. Something more personal. Why had she hated Peter so much? That night, I searched through old boxes in my storage unit, ones Susan hadn't touched. I found a stack of letters tied together with string, all addressed to my mom, all from Peter. They weren't romantic, they were desperate. "Please let me see her. I heard you moved. I just want to talk. She's my daughter, whether you like it or not. Susan said I wasn't welcome, but I don't believe you'd do this to me." There were 23 letters, all dated between the year after my birth and the year before Mom died. My mother had saved them, but for some reason she'd never given them to me. And Susan, she must have intercepted him, kept him away, fed me the lie, faked the document, controlled the story. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was an erasure. She had edited my life like a bad chapter she didn't want to read. Fueled by a mix of rage and sorrow, I did the first rational thing I could think of. I contacted the lab listed on the document, the one from the sealed envelope. I explained that I had 2 versions of a test, possibly from the same time period, and I needed confirmation of which one was genuine. The man on the phone was cautious, but helpful. "Do you have the reference ID from the report?" he asked. I gave him the number. He looked it up. "Ma'am, yes. That test result is in our system. The father listed, Peter Cole, is confirmed as a biological match. We only issued one official result under that reference ID. My throat tightened. So, the one that says inconclusive? We never issued a version like that for this case. It sounds altered. Can I get a written confirmation of that? He paused. With your mother listed as the original client, I'd need proof of next of kin. If you can supply a death certificate and some ID, we can send you an authenticated letter. I had both. Within the week, a certified letter arrived. Black and white, official, damning. Our records indicate that only one official DNA test result was issued under case ID number 5483, Cole. This report concluded that Peter Cole is the biological father of the child in question. No alternative versions were released by our facility. That was it. The final nail. Susan hadn't just lied to me. She had fabricated a document. She had committed fraud. The pain wasn't just from what she'd done, it was from what I'd lost. Decades. Memories that could have been. A father I'd pushed away because I thought he didn't want me. A man who had begged to be in my life and had been shut out by a woman pretending to protect me. This wasn't going to be fixed with a family talk. This needed justice. Legal, public, undeniable. It was time for Aunt Susan to face everything she tried to bury. I wasn't a vengeful person by nature. I'd grown up swallowing disappointment like bitter tea, quietly, politely, as if it were part of being a good daughter. But this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a deliberate attempt to erase 2 lives from an entire family legacy, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The morning after I received the official letter from the lab, I took a deep breath and drove to Peter's house. Yes, his house. I had tracked down his address weeks before, but hadn't dared to knock. Not after years of silence, of ignoring his birthday cards, of believing he was a stranger who never wanted me. Now I knew the truth. I had to face him. When he opened the door, I almost backed away. He looked older than I remembered, his face weathered and thinner, his eyes wary, but kind. Always kind. "Hi," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's me, Hannah." He froze. His lips parted like he was about to speak but couldn't. Tears welled up instantly. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet, stunned grief. "I was told you weren't mine," I added quickly. "All these years, I thought—" He stepped aside wordlessly, letting me in. That conversation was long, raw, full of pieces we had both carried separately for decades. When I told him about the forged DNA test, the fake version Susan had handed me, the letters I'd found, he didn't look surprised. He looked broken. "I tried so hard," he said. "Your aunt. She wouldn't even let me come to the funeral." I pulled out my phone, showing him the photo of the real report. "You are my father. You always were." We sat in silence for a while. No accusations. Just the weight of lost time sitting heavy between us. But then I laid out my plan. I told him I wanted to take legal action, not just for me, but for him. For everything we were denied. The inheritance my mother wanted me to have. The history Susan tried to rewrite. The basic right to exist in our own family. Peter hesitated at first. "It'll tear the family apart." I shook my head. "She already did that. I'm just pulling the curtain back." That week, I hired a lawyer, Marcy Delgado, a tough, razor-smart woman who specialized in estate fraud and inheritance cases. When I told her the full story, she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is more than forgery. This is generational theft." We started gathering evidence. I had the certified DNA letter, the real test copy, the fake one Susan had shown me, the letters from Peter, my mother's handwriting on the envelope, even the metadata from my scanned photos showing dates of discovery. Marcy also requested a full breakdown of my grandfather's will and the estate distributions. As it turned out, the original documents had listed all blood descendants as equal heirs. But Susan had submitted an addendum, claiming I was not a blood relative based on the falsified DNA test. That was our smoking gun. Next, we contacted the DNA lab again, this time with a formal legal request to verify the signatures, timestamps, and access history of the reports. The lab's compliance team responded with a digital access log. The original report had been issued on a Tuesday in June 2005. The forged one was not in their system at all. But, get this, Susan had signed as a guardian requesting a second copy later that year. Marcy smiled. There it is. She had access. She had motive. She fabricated evidence to influence a will. That's fraud. That's perjury. That's criminal. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. For the first time in years, I wasn't the confused girl trying to piece together scraps of memory. I was a woman reclaiming her story, with receipts. We filed a formal petition with the probate court to reopen the estate distribution under suspicion of fraud. A subpoena was issued for Susan, and a date was set for a formal family hearing. I knew I was about to set off a bomb in the middle of the Cole family, but honestly, it was already burning. I just lit the match that showed the smoke. News of the court petition hit the family like a lightning strike, and Susan, predictably, was the first to thunder. 3 days after she was served, she left me a voicemail. No greeting, no explanation, just fury. I don't know what game you're playing, Hannah, but you need to stop. This will destroy what's left of this family. You're making a fool of yourself. She didn't deny anything, not once. That told me everything I needed to know. What followed was an avalanche of behind-the-scenes chaos. Cousins who hadn't spoken in years suddenly had opinions. Family members started whispering about documents and inheritance and Susan's grip on the will. Most had assumed she was just the efficient older sister who kept things tidy after Grandpa died. But now, people were starting to remember how she never showed anyone the full will, how she always insisted she handled the paperwork, how odd it was that I'd been cut out entirely. Whispers turned to questions. And Susan? She panicked. She called Peter, left a message saying he was being used, and that I was just looking for money. Then she texted me a photo of us together when I was little, with a caption that read, "Remember who raised you." I stared at that text for a long time, then deleted it. Because no photo could erase what she did. Meanwhile, Marcy worked fast. She filed an emergency injunction to freeze the remaining estate assets until the hearing. That included a vacation cabin in Michigan that Susan had been quietly preparing to sell. When the injunction came through, the sale was blocked. And suddenly, Susan was cornered financially too. That's when she made her first real move. She hired a lawyer, some gray-haired man named Kenneth Rusk, who specialized in family mediation. His strategy? Not denial, not defense, but discrediting me. Within a week, his office submitted a counterclaim accusing me of manipulating the lab, of doctoring the current test results, and of coercing Peter to make a false claim to the estate. It was laughable, except it wasn't, because now things were official, public, the kind of thing that made people take sides. Susan's allies started circling the wagons. A couple of my second cousins blocked me on Facebook. One aunt called me crying, begging me to just let it go. But I had momentum, and truth, and most of all, I had Peter. He stood by me at every meeting, every call, every filing. He told the judge in his affidavit, "I tried to be part of my daughter's life. I was shut out. This test proves what I always knew. She is mine, and her mother wanted me in her life." Those words were worth more than any dollar figure in that inheritance. But Susan didn't stop. She submitted a motion to have the original DNA test declared inadmissible, claiming chain of custody issues. Too late. Marcy had already obtained a signed statement from the lab verifying authenticity, timestamp, and source. And we had the envelope, my mother's writing, dated and archived in the church record logs. Then came the emails. Oh, the emails. During discovery, Marcy requested digital communication between Susan and the estate attorney. Buried in a cluttered PDF export was a 2005 message from Susan to the lawyer saying, "Don't worry about the girl, her test came back negative, we have it in writing." That email aligned perfectly with the forged document's date. Same week, same lie. That was the moment we knew she was going to lose. But it wasn't just about winning a case, it was about reclaiming a name, a father, a history that had been stolen in plain sight. As the court hearing date approached, I could feel the walls tightening around Susan. She stopped responding to calls. Her lawyer grew cold and evasive. I heard she canceled her book club and skipped church for the first time in 10 years. She was unraveling. And this time, I wasn't the one in the dark. There's a special kind of satisfaction when the truth you've chased for decades finally claws its way to the surface, louder than every lie meant to bury it. If you've ever had to fight your own family for what's rightfully yours, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Your story matters more than they ever admitted. The courthouse wasn't even that big, just a small probate courtroom tucked inside a modest brick building in Franklin County. But the day of the hearing, it felt massive, like walking into a coliseum where reputations would rise or fall. I arrived early, too early. The waiting area smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. My palms were sweaty, even though the air conditioning hummed. Peter sat beside me, dressed in a suit 2 sizes too loose, but his spine was straight and his jaw was set. He looked ready. "You don't have to say anything if you're not comfortable," I told him quietly. He looked over and smiled. "I've been quiet long enough." That hit me harder than I expected. Meanwhile, Marcy paced nearby, shuffling documents like playing cards, exhibits, affidavits, timestamps, email transcripts, lab certifications. Every one of them a brick in the wall we were building around Susan's lies. Across the room, the double doors opened. Susan entered with her lawyer, Kenneth Rusk. She wore a charcoal gray skirt suit and a pearl brooch, as if dressing like a church matron could make her sins look cleaner. But her eyes gave her away, tight, darting, and colder than I remembered. For a moment, our eyes met. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She calculated. I could almost see the wheels turning. Maybe she thought I'd back down once I saw her in person. Maybe she assumed I'd still crave her approval deep down, the way I had as a girl. She didn't know me anymore. As the bailiff called our case, we all rose. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and sharp glasses, took her seat, flipping through the pre-submitted case brief. Marcy leaned toward me and whispered, "We'll start with evidence chain. You'll testify second. Peter third. She'll go last." I nodded. Then something unexpected happened. The court clerk brought out a stack of binders and distributed them to the judge, the attorneys, and the official record. Inside each was our full evidence packet, color-coded and tabbed for each point. The original DNA test, the certified lab letter, Susan's forged copy, the lab's access logs, Peter's letters, my mother's envelope, the church registry record, and the email. That email. The one where Susan lied in writing to the estate attorney in 2005. I watched as the judge lingered on it, brows raised, lips slightly parted. She adjusted her glasses, reread the line, and made a note. Susan noticed, too. I saw her flinch, just barely. But it was there. Her fingers clenched around the armrest of her chair. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Marcy leaned back with a calm that could slice glass. "We've got her," she mouthed. But even with the truth lined up, the hardest part still lay ahead, saying it out loud, in front of strangers, in front of her, tearing open old wounds in a room full of people who once trusted her. This wasn't just about property or paperwork. This was about restoring a father and naming a betrayal for what it truly was. The stage was set, the curtain was rising, and I was no longer the girl who stayed quiet to keep the peace. The town hall auditorium was packed, the lights slightly dimmed, murmurs filling the room as community members, local business owners, and even media representatives filed in. On the stage, flanked by banners proclaiming Small Business Sustainability Forum, stood Jessica, poised, calm, and dressed in a navy blue blazer that gave her a quiet authority. The tension in the room was almost electric. No one knew what was coming, but everyone sensed something big was about to break. In the front row sat Mitchell, arms folded, wearing his signature smirk. Next to him was his new fiancée, an impeccably dressed woman with vacant eyes who looked vaguely uncomfortable under the press of attention. They were both under the impression that this forum was about new funding opportunities. They didn't yet know it would be about them. When Jessica took the podium, her voice was steady. Thank you all for being here. Today, we're not just talking about sustainability in business. We're talking about accountability, transparency, and justice. Her slideshow began. At first, it looked like any other presentation: charts, data, trends. But then, one slide flicked to an image of Mitchell's company logo, followed by documentation of financial discrepancies, inflated invoices, suspicious wire transfers, ghost vendor names. There was a hush. Mitchell straightened in his chair. Jessica continued. This is just one example of how public funds, meant to support real small businesses, were rerouted through shell corporations, set up under pseudonyms and funneled into private accounts. Gasps erupted from the audience. Jessica clicked again. On the screen now appeared a company registered under the name Cameron Sloan, along with a copy of the business license and a routing slip tracing its funds, straight to Mitchell's primary bank account. Mitchell shot to his feet, voice rising. This is slander. You have no right. Jessica didn't flinch. Please let me finish, Mr. Warren. Another click. This time, Jessica played a short audio recording. Mitchell's voice came through loud and clear. Just shift the invoice totals across to the dummy accounts. Nobody audits these rural grants anyway. It's like free money. A stunned silence fell over the room. Jessica turned to the audience. This recording was submitted anonymously, verified, and cross-referenced with email chains and banking records I was able to compile over the last 3 months. And unfortunately, Mr. Warren isn't the only one who benefited. Whispers became outrage. Mitchell's fiancée leaned away from him, visibly embarrassed. Reporters started scribbling furiously. Cell phones were raised. Flashes went off. As Mitchell began shouting again, trying to discredit Jessica, a stern voice interrupted him from the side of the stage. It was the city's chief legal officer. We've seen enough. Mr. Warren, you'll need to come with us. 2 plainclothes investigators stepped forward. Mitchell froze. You can't do this. I built this town. I own this town. But no one moved to help him. His supporters, many of whom Jessica had contacted privately with pieces of the truth, now looked away, ashamed. Jessica stepped back from the podium, exhaling slowly. Her hands trembled slightly, but her eyes remained focused, unyielding. She watched as Mitchell was escorted out of the building, reporters swarming behind. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. Applause for the woman who had stood alone, gathered her pain, and weaponized it into truth. Jessica didn't smile. Not yet. But there was a fire in her chest. Not of revenge, but of release. This wasn't just about Mitchell anymore. It was about showing every single person watching that the most dangerous thing you could ever do was underestimate a woman who refused to be silenced. 2 days after the courtroom showdown, I walked into my father's house for the last time. The air inside smelled of old newspapers and memories gone sour. It wasn't my home anymore. It never had been, really. But I needed to see it through. I had a key, one he forgot to take back, and a resolve he'd never be able to break again. I wasn't there to argue or explain. I was there to make something clear. He was sitting on the recliner, watching an old Western rerun on mute, staring at the TV like it held answers. For once, he looked small. Not weak, not defeated, just stripped down to what he was, a man who chose convenience and vanity over family. He glanced at me and said nothing. "I'm selling the land," I said, setting the thick manila envelope on the coffee table. "The one that Mom and I used to walk through behind the old barn. It's mine now. You signed it away in 2003 when you remarried. Guess your lawyer forgot to double-check the boundaries." He opened his mouth, then closed it. Maybe he remembered that letter Mom wrote, the one I read out loud in court. Maybe he remembered the trust papers she tucked away, just in case he ever tried to erase her legacy. "I don't want your apology," I said, softer now. "I want you to know I'm done letting you ghost through my life like you still have a say. I'm not your secret, your second priority, your reluctant responsibility. I'm Emily Carter. I raised a son with more heart than you'll ever understand, and I'm not afraid of walking away." He didn't fight back. He didn't cry. He didn't ask about Aiden or Linda or what would happen next. That told me everything. I left the envelope, a notarized statement of sale, copies of the trust transfer, and a letter addressed to the town council revoking his pending zoning application. He wasn't going to build anything on that land. Not luxury cabins, not rental homes, not even a shed. The land would be transferred to a local wildlife trust, per my mother's original wishes. As I drove away, the fields blurred past the window. Wild daisies dotted the edge of the fence line, just like they had when I was a kid. My mother used to call them survivor flowers. They grew in the worst soil, in the strangest places, and never asked for permission. I didn't need vengeance anymore. I needed peace. But peace wasn't passive. It was earned. And I had fought for mine every step of the way. I stopped by the cemetery before heading home. Aiden waited in the car while I walked the short path to her gravestone. I crouched down, brushing off a few dry leaves. "I did it, Mom," I whispered. "He tried to erase you, but I didn't let him." The wind picked up, rustling the branches above. "And Aiden, he's doing great. You'd be proud of him. And I finally let myself be proud too." I didn't stay long. There were no long speeches, no candles, no ceremony, just the stillness of a woman who had found her voice, and the silence of a mother who had waited long enough to hear it. When I got back in the car, Aiden asked, "Are we okay now?" I smiled. "Yeah, buddy, we are." We drove off toward a new beginning. No strings, no shadows, no ghosts left to haunt us. The months following the courtroom victory felt strangely quiet. Not empty, but still. A kind of calm Emily hadn't experienced in years. She kept working at the free clinic, but cut back her hours to 3 days a week. For the first time in decades, she had time to sleep in, to sip her morning coffee on the porch, to breathe without flinching. Aiden, now 19, enrolled in a local community college. He was studying computer animation, and while the scars of what he'd endured still lingered, they no longer defined him. His confidence was a slow, steady flame, not flashy, but resilient. One afternoon, they sat in the backyard under a maple tree. The wind rustled through the leaves, and Aiden said quietly, "You didn't have to fight for me that hard, but I'm really glad you did." Emily turned to him, eyes soft. "I didn't do it just for you. I did it for every version of you I've ever known. Every scared little boy who needed to be seen." They hugged. No words, just warmth. Meanwhile, Linda's empire crumbled publicly. Investors pulled out. Her board sued for misrepresentation. Her name, once gold in luxury finance, became synonymous with cruelty and fraud. She tried to rebrand, to launch a podcast about women in leadership, but it fizzled out after 2 awkward episodes. Some said she moved to Arizona. Others claimed she was living in a condo under a different name. Emily didn't care. Let her vanish. That part of the story was over. One evening, Emily opened a letter postmarked from a quiet town upstate. It was from Rachel, the assistant who had quit in solidarity. Inside was a handwritten note. You lit a fire in all of us. I'm now working at a nonprofit that helps neurodiverse kids find internships. Your fight inspired more than you'll ever know. Emily smiled, folded the letter, and tucked it into her journal. Later that week, she stood at the front of a small community group, sharing her story, not the revenge, not the downfall, but the journey back to herself. The crowd wasn't large, but their eyes were kind. Some nodded, some cried. A few, like her, carried invisible bruises. Her voice didn't shake anymore. I don't believe healing means forgetting, she told them. It means remembering who you are, even after someone tried to erase you. As the room applauded gently, Emily felt something shift inside. Not closure exactly, but peace. And in that peace, a quiet promise. She would keep living, fiercely and fully, not for vengeance, but for joy. The world hadn't changed overnight, but she had, and that was enough.